Hello, my dear friends. You're on the MilitarySummary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 2nd of October of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And one of the most important updates is coming from Denmark, where the European summit took place. Zelensky visited Copenhagen with the purpose to participate there. So here you can see the video how President Zelensky arrived in Denmark to participate in the European Political Community Summit, very important summit where European leaders and Zelensky were talking about ways how to fight Russia. For example, Ursula von der Leyen stated today that the European Council in Copenhagen is taking place at the perfect time. We're going to discuss two topics, defense and Ukraine. Regarding defense, my committee has prepared a review document to discuss actions areas, including, for example, flagship projects like the drone wall. And when it comes to Ukraine, if we all agree that Ukraine is our first line of defense, we must increase military support for Kiev for Zelensky. Also, we had statement from the president of the European Council. He stated and he promises Ukraine golden mountains and warns Russia with the new military program and sanctions. So we got lots of statements, but there is one important and specific thing that happened today during this meeting, during this summit, and we are talking about France, because today, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, France crossed the red line. And France is the first European country that directly attacked Russia. Macron called for disrupting trade in Russia oil by detaining tankers of the Shadow Fleet. During his speech at the European Political Community Summit in Copenhagen, French President Emmanuel Macron proposed detaining tankers carrying Russian oil for weeks in order to reduce Russia's ability to finance military operations in Ukraine and force it to negotiate. It is extremely important to increase pressure on this Shadow Fleet because it is clearly reduces the ability to finance military actions. I would like to remind you that just several hours before this summit, according to information we have, French special forces boarded and seized a Russian oil tanker sailing off France's western coast moments ago, stating that the vessels is part of Russia's Shadow Fleet. So this is very important, and once again, this is the first attack that was carried out by the European country without hiding behind backs of Ukrainian soldiers. Yes, this is not a military ship, but this is a part of a Shadow Fleet which brings Russia significant, let's say, costs, significant money and so on. And France attacked this vessel. They didn't capture the fleet for this vessel. They just stopped this vessel for several days, as was stated by Macron. The main purpose is just to ruin logistics, to increase costs and to increase insurance, just to ruin the business model. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, whether this attack is just the only attack, whether the other countries are going to do the same. Because, for example, if every single day one of the countries of the coalition of willing will stop the Russian ship, this can lead to huge problems to the Russian Federation. And for example, today the chief of staff for the French army stated that the forces must be ready as early as tonight for high intensivity warfare, warning of a potential direct military confrontation in the near future with Russia over the defense of a NATO ally in Eastern Europe. So France clearly understands that if Russia decides to attack France for this situation to the west of France in the sea, then the war will happen, will start between Russia, NATO and Ukraine, everything all together, and this can lead, telling the truth, to unpredictable consequences for every single country in the world. And this is the reason why the president of why the chief of the general staff for France stated that it is very important to see that the fight for some Eastern European country may happen very soon, because obviously if the war between NATO and the Russian Federation starts, then most likely, first of all, it will start on the territory of the Baltic states. So this is the situation. As of now, we still haven't seen anything from the Russian side, no reaction to this event. Obviously, now the Russians are trying to find a solution, what to do next, and most likely something big might happen in coming days, not directly from the Russian side, but probably using something, some proxy or something like this. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. As we discussed during the previous video, the Russians during the previous 24 hours carry out massive missile attack, massive drone attack all over the entire territory of Ukraine. That's at the end led to massive power outages all over the entire territory of Ukraine. We received reports that Ukrainians still haven't managed to stabilize the situation in the Chernihiv region. This area is without electricity completely. This is a huge disaster for Ukraine. Most likely, if the situation continues, we are talking about not the summer period of time when the weather was very good. We are talking about autumn and winter, and it is very cold right now in houses, at homes. So if the situation continues, most likely we're going to see another wave of evacuation, of immigration of Ukrainians from the northern and the northeastern parts in the western directions towards the city of Lvov, or probably in the direction of other European countries. So this is a complete disaster, and everything started right after Ukrainians began bombing and attacking actively the city of Energodar and the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Today, for example, Rafael Grossi stated that the risk of a nuclear accident is present in Europe. Most likely he was talking about the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, the biggest power plant in Europe. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first we're going to talk about the Zaporozhye direction. Once again, during the previous 24 hours, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to improve their positions significantly. So let's compare the map before we proceed. This is the situation, for example, by the end of the 30th of September of 2025. And if you remember, on the 30th of September, I told you that that was the first day, probably since the beginning of Russian offensive operation in the Zaporozhye direction, when we hadn't received anything about changes on the ground. So most likely, the Russians used that short operational pause for regrouping, and right after this pause that took place most likely on the 30th of September of 2025, the Russians began another wave of their major offensive in the Zaporozhye direction. And by the end of the 1st of October of 2025, the Russians, as you can see, managed to improve their position significantly by getting very close to the road R85 that connects the settlements of Gulyai-Polye and Pokrovsk. Furthermore, the Russians managed to enter the eastern part of the settlement of Poltavka and to dig in deeper. Currently, the clashes are taking place for the Poltavka fortified area. By the end of the 2nd of October of 2025, the Russians managed to improve their positions once again, this time around the settlement of Novoivanovka. We have video, we have geolocation that confirms Russian control over the territory. We will not watch this video because here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian motorcycles, stormtroopers that were using motorcycles to get as close as possible to the Uspienovka fortified area. But based on this video, we have adjusted the map. Currently, the Russians are just in 1.6 kilometers from the city of Uspienovka, from the Uspienovka fortified area, which is already nothing, but the Russians will not attack the city of Uspienovka itself. First, the Russians will finish the battle for the settlement of Novogrigorovka, and first of all, the Russians will try to capture these farms that located to the south of Novogrigorovka. We're talking about this area, and right after this, the Russians will continue their offensive operation, and this time they will try to attack the settlement itself. Of course, it is not going to be a very easy job. There are just some constructions on the Russian side of the river of Yanchul. First of all, the Russians will try to take them under control, and then the Russians will start thinking how to cross the river of Yanchul and how to enter the Ukrainian side of the river. If Russians, as we discussed in the previous video, are able to establish complete control over this territory, this is going to be the complete collapse of the entire Zaporozhye defense. Ukrainians will not be able to hold Russians. Russians will be able, without any resistance, to move further in the western direction, to cut R85 road, and then to cut in Cauldron the city of Gulyai-Polye. Then the Russians will continue doing the same until they cut in Cauldron the city of Orekhov, and then the Russians will answer the eastern part of the city of Zaporozhye. So everything is easy, everything is simple. The question is whether the Ukrainians are able to show anything. As of the end of the 2nd of October, they still haven't shown anything. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. There are very heavy clashes in the area of breakthrough. The Ukrainians improved their positions, the Russians improved their positions, so let's discuss everything in details. First, let's talk about the settlement of Dorozhny. The Ukrainians, during the previous 24-48 hours, carried out a counter-attack in this area with the purpose to encircle the Russians who are currently located in the area of this settlement, and most likely the Ukrainians managed to do this. So let's discuss this in detail. And we are talking first of all about this video. Here we can see how Ukrainians using Bradleys, which is very interesting, and in 2025 this is a very unique video. The Ukrainians stopped using Bradleys for probably a reason that they lost lots of them during the Kursk offensive operation or so. So here we can see how Ukrainians using two Bradley vehicles attacked Russian positions. They managed to outflank the settlement of Dorozhny. So this is the way how Ukrainians were moving. First along this road, then they moved further in the northern direction, then the Ukrainians once again turned in the eastern direction, then back to the south, and then once again in the eastern direction. Somewhere here Ukrainian vehicles of Bradley type stopped, and Ukrainian soldiers most likely landed somewhere here. Most likely Ukrainians entered this forest with the purpose to control the situation from this point. So, and right exactly in this point, two Ukrainian Bradleys were damaged and destroyed by Russian FPV drone attacks. So this is telling the truth, something like a disaster or a desperate action. The Ukrainians now are forced to use these Bradley vehicles. Usually they don't do this, but now they are forced to do this, which means that they don't have any other option. So this is the situation. Most likely the Ukrainians control this forest, this one, and the purpose of this attack was to cut supply lines that go in the direction of Dorozhny from the mainland. Ukrainians will try to hold their positions for as long as possible in this forest, and at the same time Ukrainians will try to attack the settlement of Dorozhny with the purpose to force the Russians to fall back. So this is very important position that was recaptured by Russians several days ago. Let's wait and see what is going to be next. The Russians will try to do everything they can with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to recapture these territories. Furthermore, pro-Ukraine resources reported that during the previous days, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions significantly in the village of Nova Shaha, which basically was recaptured by the Ukrainians. And Ukrainians reported that they managed to cut Russian positions and to destroy Russian positions between the villages of Zolotoy Kolodez and the settlement of Nova Shahova. So based on the reports of different mappers and different experts, we adjusted the map. So as you can see, these are the changes on the ground between the dates. At the same time, we got another video, this time published from the settlement of Vesole. So this is the video I'm talking about. This video was published by Ukrainian sources, and here we can see how Ukrainians were FPV droning Russian positions, were attacking Russians along the tree line and with FPV drones. This is very important video because this episode, this attack took place exactly in this point. So which means and which confirms that the Russians controlled this tree line when Ukrainians began bombing it. So this is very important because based on this video we have adjusted the map. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 1st of October, and this is the situation by the end of the 2nd of October of 2025. And I would like to point to attention that most of the adjustments made in Ukrainian favor we made based on let's say pro-Ukraine resources without proofs. And most of adjustments that were made in Russian favor we made based on videos, which is very important difference. So which means that it's, let's say, it looks like that the Russians or the Ukrainians provide more reliable information about Russians than about themselves. So anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. But one thing I can tell you for sure, that the Russians have much stronger foothold in the area of breakthrough than Ukrainians are drawing for us. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in Konstantinovka direction. The Russians continue bombing and attacking Ukrainian positions in the southeastern part. In the southern part, the Ukrainians are bringing more and more forces in this area, and this is the only reason why the Russians can't move further deep inside of the city. The situation is very difficult. There are hundreds of drones, and the most important, there are thousands of Ukrainian soldiers who are trying to hold their positions for as long as possible. So that is why the Russians still have a lot of job to do, and they will continue bombing and attacking this territory until they understand that Ukrainians were completely exhausted. Only then Russians will continue offensive. As for the series direction, probably this is the first day when we haven't received anything about additional changes on the ground. The Russians just finished the battle for Zarechna, the Russians just finished the battle for Shandrigolova. I'm not saying that there are no clashes in this area. Obviously the clashes are very heavy on the territory of these settlements, but the thing is that currently we can see a very close combat between Russians and Ukrainians without changes on the ground. As for the city of Seversk, during the previous 24 hours we received lots of videos how Russians continued bombing and attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine all over the entire territory of the city of Seversk, on the territory of the settlement of Dronovka, but without changes on the ground. The only information we got is that the Russians currently are moving along the river of Seversky Donets with the purpose to attack the settlement of Dronovka through the tree lines. Currently the clashes are taking place for this territory. The Russians are about to finish the battle for this area, and then the Russians will move further. So basically we can say that the battle for the settlement of Dronovka has begun. Now most likely it will take time before Russians are able to capture the territory completely. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.